Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, Cyrus, May, and the Vesos descend into the fighting to rescue Strena, guided by Cyrus's strange resonance. Hold on for dear life as Edara and the Old City clash, now on the Seventh Valkyrie. Freaking do it. We cut through the crowd into the dark of the alleyways and the winding tunnels and footbridges. My senses flared at the sudden shift in stimulation. Footsteps echoing off the cobbles now hit like blows of thunder, and panting breath erupted like a blast of wind. And then we emerged again, out into the crisp sea breeze of the harborside hills. Below us, shimmering armor clashed against the streaking, multicolored gifts of the families, and somewhere down there, wedged in like a termite buried in wood, shined the green light, where Strena was pleading and begging for Carmore's life, giving him as much of hers as she could. He had been hit, and he was hit bad, but right now we didn't have time to think about that. May shouted and I pointed, and we descended along the winding hillside roads toward the waterfront, joined at times by the people of the Old City rising to fight for their homes, and at others by the forming legions of family soldiers. All of us were streaming down towards where the fighting was thickest, where the booming elements now layered over a mass of violent cries in Edaran. Already the fighting had fractured out along the streets, no longer confined to the waterfront, and for the first time May paused as I directed us towards Strena. After conferring with the Vesos, she turned us around, looping further up along the harborside hills. At May's urging, I pushed faster, and we weaved in and out along the harborside ridge, through the shops and hostels and homes and hideaways, always a step quicker than the steady onrush of the Edarans, who pushed out and out into the city like foamy wash rushing in from the ocean. Twice I caught glimpses of them, marching down the street with shields held forward, and then May shouted to the Vesos in the wild speech as the next winding alleyway spat us right out into the heat of the fray, where Edarans clashed with Freelanders. One moment I was running behind May and the Vesos, and in the next they had raced forward like a landslide into the streets, crashing into the unexpecting Edaran soldiers. She had sent a wave of earth that had carved a path through the Edaran formation, and anyone left stumbling who had survived the first attack was torn to pieces under the striking knives of the Vesos, never breaking their stride. In another moment, for 3 steps, I was suddenly alone in no man's land, a gap in 2 rivers, hundreds of Edaran soldiers on either side of me. As I reached the alley, the Edarans bellowed forward, shoving into the gap with another dozen men to replace the ones who had fallen in our attack. But the break in the advance had given the Old City Defiance precious breathing room. A call ran out, Vividi Moria, live free to the death, and as we fled, the Freelanders descended. We looped down another twist in the alley, leaving us a precious moment of panting silence as we ran. My lungs were burning and my legs were tired, but there was no world in which I was thinking about slowing down. The energy surging out from May and the Vesos filled me with life just by being near them, and the emerald light of Strena, still begging as she felt Carmore's heart slowing, drew me forward even faster. Strena was close, so close now that I could feel our senses starting to resonate. We were starting to see the same things, hear the same energies, but from different places, which was very strange. Still, I focused on leading us towards Strena, with each call pointing and letting May guide the way. But then May and the Vesos skidded to a stop ahead of me, and I ran straight into Cabel's outstretched arm, which was sort of like running into a fallen tree trunk. Around us, the fighting echoed throughout the city, but the street before us was silent. Ahead, somewhere around the next bend in the street, lay the emerald light, and Strena with it. But in front of them was a steady, approaching company of Edaran soldiers, dozens across and dozens deep and still advancing. There was a call from the Edarans, and archers loosed, a hissing rain of arrows streaking through the air only to crash against a wall of earth that swelled up through the cobbles, summoned by May and the Vesos together. There was another cry of orders, and the Edarans began to thunder towards us down the street. Cyrus. I pointed, slowly, directly into the wall of earth. She's there. She's behind them, I said. May nodded, and then spoke quick instructions to each of the Vesos. Another rain of hissing arrows crashed against the earth wall, but it held firm, buttressed by May's power. Vesos then fanned out to either side of us, and the beads and stones in their braids began to glow a rich, deep green. If their power before had emanated with the force of a landslide, now it felt more like the rumblings of a far-off earthquake. As that power built, I heard the Vesos speak for the first time, chanting in deep voices and gravelly tones with words from the wild speech. With each step, their thumping power grew stronger, and May's resonated right along with them. Down the street, there were commands being shouted in Edaran, and then swords clanging on steel as the Edarans howled back with their own war cries. May breathed deep and took a step back. "Stay close to me, Cyrus. If the first wave does not break them, stay close to me." The Vesos chanted louder, voices rising along with their power, building until it was ready to burst. And then in the powder keg silence, as the Vesos prepared their charge, I heard the growing sound of boots on rooftops. A whistle went out, and as the Vesos punched forward with the will of the earth itself, the rooftops filled all at once with the many-colored glow of dozens of gifted. The soldiers of the families, eyes and arms all alight. The wall of earth that May had created around us split into three, and then it fired, off down the street into the Edaran phalanx. Those surging blasts of stone and earth created gaps, hurling men into the air, leaving behind gashes in the earth and flesh and armor alike. But as the waves of earth broke, the core of the Edaran warforce remained intact. At least until, as one, the glowing, gifted soldiers of the families dropped in like merciless comets onto the sides and back of the Edaran formation. May grabbed my arm, tossed me onto her shoulder, and then leaped up onto the rooftops just as the Edaran warforce shattered, going from a single unconquerable hole into fragmented straggles of men locked in battle with raging gifted. "Where is Strena?" May demanded. I pointed and May dragged me along with her, the streets erupting with color as the Edarans fought desperately to regain formation. Together, Edaran shields and waves of arrows and careful structure might have given them an advantage over the festival goers, but against the gifted warriors, even a trained Edaran soldier was severely outmatched, and there were a lot of gifted warriors. May and I leapt into alleyway between homes where Edarans had begun to retreat, fighting in tight corners against furious family warriors. The family's fighters bellowed curses as they battered and burned the armored Edarans. Out across the streets and across the city, there were bursts of power and blood. The families were descending upon the Edaran army, but we didn't have time to wait. Ahead of us, the emerald light glowed behind a row of homes. As May landed, she threw me onto the ground, where I scrambled to my feet. Behind me, she had stopped to hold the line, claws wide and howling with power. "Get Strena, now!" With muscle memory that certainly wasn't mine, I followed a neglected footpath between two homes, dropping on all fours to finally crawl between the buildings and underneath one of them. My vision doubled, and then what she was seeing and thinking made their incursion into my reality again. Carmore's breathing had slowed to nothing. Strena had poured her power into him just like Rama had shown her, but the wound had refused to close and he had lost blood. So much blood. And then suddenly I could see myself at the same time as I could see her. She was kneeling with hands and eyes alight over the cold, fading body of a boy. Carmore. Somehow I immediately knew that he was her longtime rival, and somehow she'd never known that she didn't want to live without him. "Strena," I said. Her hair was wet and slicked back, her green eyes wet with tears, her sleeves and dress all soaking wet and covered in blood. I had no idea what force had drawn us together, and neither did she, but I knew what I had to do. In the darkness under the old house, suddenly a pair of golden lights joined the green ones, and I edged forward onto the sticky dirt where Carmore's blood had wet the ground. Soon, green and gold lights began to pulse as one, in and out, and as I looked down, I could see a tiny set of sparks racing from my fingertips, reaching out towards her. Strena reached out a hand, one on Gorman's side and the other palm towards me. I paused, afraid of what might happen, or maybe she was, but there was no time for fear from either of us, and I reached my palm out to meet hers. There was a rush, then, of light so powerful and bright it filled the underside of the house like the shine of a midday afternoon, of energy so warm and joyful my heart went leaping and dancing, and of sights and sounds and smells and memories that felt like confiding in your closest friend and knowing that they would hold your story with the same reverence you did. I wasn't sure how long it lasted, but when that rush subsided, I could feel the wound close beneath my hand and Carmore's weak heartbeat beneath us. Then Strena tackled me with a hug like a sister who hadn't seen a big brother in far too long. She had never had a big brother, never known her family except for the Haven, and when Mama Maven had... Strena buried her face in my shoulder and cried, and all I could do was hold her and pat her on the back and let her know that I understood. With our exchanged memories, maybe I knew better than anyone. There were still a lot more tears to be cried as May came rushing down between the buildings to get us, but all of those would have to wait. The remnants of battle still raged just one street over, as the family warriors collided with the remnants of the Edaran war force. We did it, May. We saved Carmore. May waved a hand over Carmore's body as we dragged him from between the buildings. When we got free, May scooped him up off the ground, surveying the alleyways. Cyrus, Strena, can you run? We both nodded in the affirmative, and May turned and led us out of the alleyway and down the streets away from where the battle still raged. I couldn't help but whoop with joy as we followed after her, Strena racing beside me, the both of us fueled by adrenaline and fear and relief all at the same time. We had saved her, Strena, and we had saved Carmore, and I, Cyrus, had done something. 2 streets over, we turned off the road and followed May into a grove of trees, where we stopped, panting, exhausted, but alive. We were all alive. Ahead of us, May's shoulders rose and fell, and then she deliberately put Carmore down and walked back towards us with her arms wide open. Covered in sweat and tears and blood, we embraced her, feeling the safety of those strong motherly arms as she whispered to us that it would be okay, and that we just needed to trust her for what would happen next. And none of that sounded strange to me at all until she stepped forward between us, hooking each of our necks in those strong motherly arms and beginning to squeeze the life out of us. I panicked, reaching out for Strena, feeling her fear bouncing off of mine, but May kept us each locked up, squeezing the breath and the consciousness out of us at the same time as she pumped glorious green energy into us. I am truly sorry, children. Your power is resonating far too strong right now. She began to lift me up off of my feet to stop my kicking and struggling. Strena, who was already suspended in the air, was already fading. I yanked and pulled at May's arm, but I was better off trying to wrench a tree from the earth, and the arrival of the Vesos, bleeding and bloody, covered in massive wounds that complemented their violent tattoos, still brought us no respite. May's explanation of her child strangling seemed to come from very far away. She couldn't let us leave a trail on the way out of the city, apparently. Behind me, I felt Strena slip away from consciousness, and in a burst of desperation, I slammed my head backward, catching May in the face and loosening her grip on me. But it was like breaking free of one set of vines and falling into the arms of 2 more. May dropped the unconscious Strena to the ground and locked both arms around my throat. The world began to shake and my ears began to ring, and through a bleeding nose, May apologized deeply for what she had had to do, as she directed the Vesos to collect Strena and Carmore and deliver them to the Haven. I was fading fast as May explained what she'd do, which seemed like it had something to do with me, but the details sort of faded as I gasped for one last breath of air. Instead, all I heard before I passed out was May's last set of instructions, for all 3 of them when they had finished delivering the children to safety. Return to the city, save who we can, and avenge the rest. Want to know what happens next? Join us on Patreon to become a hero of Edara and get early access to episodes along with bonus features, director's commentary, and the full Tab to archive. You can also find other ways to support us at the links in the description, and we will see you next week.